going on, guys? We're here with Tony Silva. We're going to be discussing some diet key points and overall bird health.
So we were discussing diets and various components of diets. And rather than just talking about it, I figured we would show. And visuals have a greater impact than words. You were asking me about natural diets. So there is this great move towards what we call natural diets. Let's feed them flowers and leaves and branches. But we need to understand that when parrots feed in a tree, they don't just feed in a tree that produces one type of flower. They selectively feed in trees that that grow in a certain type of soil that provides certain nutrients. There's been some great work done on Kangaroo Island in Australia with glossy black cockatoos, and they found that they were so selective where they fed that it attracted attention of researchers. And then they went in and analyzed the soil and the food, and the animals were selecting plants and foods that had a higher nutritional value. So when we say, oh, we can keep them alive, feeding them chopped up grains and flowers, yeah, but do we understand where the flowers come from? Because this hibiscus grown here in Florida will be very different than a hibiscus grown in Louisiana or in California, because they absorb nutrients from the soil.
Different soil. Yeah.
So we need to understand this. This isn't one bullet that hits everything. These are multiple bullets and multiple target areas that you need to understand what you're feeding. You know, we have to remember in the 1970s when I entered agriculture, nutritional deficiencies were the greatest killers of birds. All vets, whether you look at Margaret Petrack's original book on veterinary medicine, and she was a forerunner in the 1970s, through the turn of the century, all vets agreed that nutritional deficiencies and nutritional related issues were the main killer. So, you know, we entered pellets, and everybody said, oh, but you know, they're not natural. Well, really, none of this is natural. None of this grows in parrot habitat. Macadamia nuts don't grow in Brazil, where hyacinth macaws come from. Hazelnuts don't grow in Africa. So we need to understand that nothing that we feed our birds is natural. But what we must understand is what we feed must be rich and healthy and cover their needs for fat, for calcium, for minerals, for all sorts of elements that are vital to their well-being. So I saw in the 1970s a lot of health-related issues, and we're seeing them again as people say, oh, you can feed them flowers and chopped up mush or sprouted seeds. Yes, this is very nutritional. But this is still on the head. When I take all these things and I sprout them, the parrots don't eat the whole thing. They don't take this, swallow it,
They'll take a bite.
and it's in.
Yeah.
They take a bite, and then the seed or the grain or the pulse has been bruised. And that bruising in ambient temperature over a period of time begins to grow bacteria. So when you culture sprouts, after a couple of hours in the cage, you begin to see bacterial growth.
As soon as what, 2-3 hours maybe?
A couple of hours. So, you know, we need to understand there are risks involved. It's easy to say, feed them flowers and sprouts and they'll do wonderful. But, you know, there are risks involved. First, the flowers may not provide the nutrients that they would find in the same flowers that would grow in their habitat, even though commercial flowers that we feed aren't even close to what they eat. But there's the risk of bacterial issue. Now, if you take the same grains and you boil them, well, at least you're limiting, because in a sprout, let's say this is a seed, moisture is going to get under the outer shell and it's going to sit there. So when it gets bruised, it's already got a lot of moisture. When you boil, everything is cooked homogeneous. And you leave it in the cage for an hour. and then you take it out.
Take it out, you don't leave it.
You know, with sprouts, everybody thinks, oh, they're safe. We can leave them in all day. They're not. So when you look at your bird's diet, understand that there are many elements. Ambient temperature, how is it going to affect the degradation of the food? Where was it grown? Was it grown in soil that's depleted and therefore there's minimal nutritional value? Or is the product that you're feeding really rich? Does it meet their needs? And is it palatable? Will the birds eat it? There are many things that the birds will love. You know, they love sugary foods
They're always
because they're
gonna be-
moist.
Yeah.
But they've not evolved to eat this level of sugar. Parrots in the wild won't eat bananas even at this stage. Grapes don't grow in their habitat.
They just like it, but it's not really.
So,
Empty.
you know, they're juicy, they're sweet, they're packed full of sugar, but it's not what they've evolved for. They have evolved to eat things fairly green so that they don't compete with bats and with soft-billed birds and all kinds of other species that attack the fruit when it's ripe.
When it's right. Yeah.
Parrots attack it when it's green. They have no competitors, and they have evolved to shy away from that sugary, wet, mushy food. And then when you feed all of the sugar, you have many subsequent issues. You have a tendency for Clostridium to grow. You have yeast because the yeast is feeding on all this sugar. That's why I always recommend more vegetables.
So should this be fed in as a treat, or should it just be avoided?
You can feed all of this as a treat, but it shouldn't be part of the diet every day.
Yeah.
And then you need to understand that when you take everything and you chop it up into little bits and pieces, every piece of the cutting edge will grow bacteria
As soon as you cut.
because you just expanded the growth area for bacteria. It's going to degrade. Food degrades. That's why we have refrigerators. That's why food manufacturers say, "Hey, put the food once it cools, put it in the fridge. Don't leave food sitting out." When you feed a larger chunk, yes, you're going to have more waste. But what happens is you're reducing the cut surface where bacteria can grow. I always prefer giving bigger chunks than chopped up.
Rather than small.
That's why I don't like this chop that everybody now wants to feed. It's too many surfaces, too many cut areas where bacteria can grow, where things can ferment.
That's highly risk.
It's a greater risk. So that's my concept. That's my opinion on natural foods and some of these food elements.